They say near-death experiences change you. What they don't tell you is how falling in love with the person who saves you can change you even more. My name is Nathan Parker, a 34-year-old architect from Los Angeles, and this is the story of how nearly drowning led me to the love of my life. It started on a sweltering July afternoon. I'd recently completed a major project and decided to treat myself to a day at Venice Beach. As someone who spent most of his time behind a computer screen designing buildings, I wasn't exactly a strong swimmer, but the heat was unbearable, and the ocean looked inviting. I should have noticed the warning flags. I should have paid attention to how rough the waves were that day. But I didn't. I waited out, enjoying the cool water against my skin, not realizing I was being pulled further from shore by a strong rip current. By the time I noticed something was wrong, panic had already set in. The shore seemed impossibly far away, and my arms were growing tired from fighting the current. I tried to remember what you're supposed to do in these situations. Swim parallel to the shore? But my mind was clouding with fear. The last thing I remember was a wave crashing over my head, the salt water burning my lungs as I desperately tried to surface. Then everything went black. When I came to, the first thing I saw was a pair of intense green eyes looking down at me. I was lying on the beach, coughing up what felt like half the Pacific Ocean, with a crowd gathered around me. But all I could focus on was the man leaning over me, his hands still positioned on my chest where he'd been performing compressions. "Can you hear me?" His voice was deep and steady. "Try to take slow breaths." I nodded weakly, still coughing. He helped me sit up slowly, supporting my back with a strong hand. Now I could see him properly. Tall, athletic build, with dark brown hair that was dripping wet. He was wearing red board shorts with lifeguard printed on them, and a whistle hung around his neck. "I'm James," he said, checking my pulse. "James Morrison. You gave us quite a scare there." "Nathan," I managed to croak out. "Thank you for, saving my life." He smiled, and something in my chest fluttered that had nothing to do with the near drowning. "Just doing my job. But maybe stick to the shallow end for a while?" The paramedics arrived then, insisting on taking me to the hospital for observation. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of James, now talking to another lifeguard. He looked up, and our eyes met briefly before the ambulance doors closed. At the hospital, they kept me overnight for observation. My sister Sarah came to pick me up the next morning, alternating between hugging me and scolding me for being reckless. "You could have died," she exclaimed for the 10th time as we drove home. "But I didn't," I said, my mind drifting back to those green eyes. "The lifeguard, he saved me." Sarah gave me a sideways look. "The hot one with the green eyes?" "Yeah, I saw him when I got to the beach. He stayed until the ambulance left, Seemed really concerned. He was just doing his job," I echoed his words, trying to ignore the way my heart sped up at this information. "Uh-huh." Sarah's tone was skeptical. "Is that why you keep touching your lips?" I quickly dropped my hand, not even realizing I'd been doing it. The memory of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation made my face heat up, even though I'd been unconscious at the time. "It was CPR, Sarah, not a kiss." "Still counts as first base," she teased. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop thinking about James. The way his hands had felt on my chest, strong and sure as he performed compressions. The concern in his voice when he asked if I could hear him. The smile that had made my heart skip a beat. "I need to thank him properly," I said suddenly. "He saved my life." Sarah grinned. "And it has nothing to do with wanting to see those green eyes again? Shut up and drive." But she wasn't entirely wrong. Over the next few days, as I recovered at home, I couldn't get James out of my mind. I found myself wondering about him. Was being a lifeguard his career or a summer job? Did he live nearby? Was he single? A week later, I returned to Venice Beach. I told myself it was just to properly thank the man who saved my life, but my carefully chosen outfit and the nervous flutter in my stomach suggested otherwise. I spotted him easily in his lifeguard tower, scanning the water with focused attention. The morning sun caught his profile, and I had to remind myself to breathe. He looked even better than I remembered. As I approached the tower, he noticed me, and his face lit up with recognition. "Nathan, right?" He climbed down to meet me. "Good to see you on your feet." "Yeah, thanks to you." I held up the coffee carrier I was holding. "I brought coffee, as a thank you. I mean, if you're allowed to drink on duty, I can take a quick break. He accepted the cup with a smile. How are you feeling? Much better. Though I'm staying far away from the water for now. He laughed, and the sound made my stomach do somersaults. Probably wise, although... He paused, taking a sip of coffee. I teach private swimming lessons on the side. If you're interested in building your confidence in the water, was he just being professional, or was there something more to the offer? Before I could overthink it, I heard myself say, that would be great, actually. We exchanged numbers, and I tried not to read too much into the way his fingers lingered when he handed my phone back. First lesson's free, he said with a wink. For repeat customers, do you make a habit of saving people from drowning? His expression turned serious. You were different. Most people I pull out just need a little help getting back to shore. You. He ran a hand through his hair. You weren't breathing when I got to you. Those few minutes before you started coughing, they were terrifying. The vulnerability in his voice made my heart ache. I'm sorry I scared you. Just don't do it again, he said softly. Then, clearing his throat, unless you want another mouth-to-mouth session, I felt my face heat up, and he immediately looked mortified. Sorry, that was inappropriate. I shouldn't joke about, it's fine, I interrupted, gathering my courage. Though I prefer my kisses when I'm conscious. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I worried I'd misread the situation entirely. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Good to know, he said, his voice lower than before. Before either of us could say more, his radio crackled to life. He gave me an apologetic look. Duty calls. I'll text you about those lessons. I nodded, trying to contain my grin. Looking forward to it. As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on me. Sarah was never going to let me hear the end of this. True to his word, James texted me that evening to set up our first lesson. We arranged to meet early Saturday morning, before the beach got crowded. I arrived to find him already in the water, doing laps. The sight of him emerging from the waves, water running down his chest, nearly made me forget why I was there. Morning, he called out, jogging over. Ready to face your fears? The lesson started in shallow water, with James teaching me proper breathing techniques. His hands were gentle but firm as he guided me through the motions, and I tried to focus on his instructions rather than the way his touch sent sparks through my body. You're naturally buoyant, he observed. That's good. The key is staying calm and working with the water, not against it. Easy for him to say. Being this close to him was making it impossible to stay calm. We progressed to floating exercises, with James supporting my back as I lay in the water. The trust exercise felt oddly intimate. So, he said conversationally, what made an architect decide to brave the ocean alone that day? How did you know I'm an architect? I might have looked you up, he admitted. Wanted to make sure you were okay after. You know, stalking your patients, Dr. Morrison. He splashed water at me playfully. Hey, I just completed my medical residency. Using doctor is fair game. I lost my concentration and slipped under the water in surprise. James pulled me up immediately, his arms wrapping around me. You're a doctor, I spluttered. Emergency medicine. I work at UCLA Medical Center. Lifeguarding is more of a calling, I guess. I did it through college and med school. Couldn't give it up even after getting my license. We were still standing close, his hands on my waist, supposedly to steady me. The water suddenly felt very warm. So you save lives both on and off the beach. I meant it to sound teasing, but my voice came out breathier than intended. His eyes met mine, and the intensity in them made my heart race. Nathan, yes? Instead of answering, he leaned forward slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away. I didn't. His lips met mine, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence when I responded. He tasted like salt water and something uniquely him, and this time I was very much conscious for it. That kiss changed everything. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since you brought me coffee, he admitted. I've wanted you to do that since I woke up on the beach, I countered. Well, technically before that, but I was unconscious. He laughed, the sound echoing across the morning water. Most people don't flirt with their rescue scenarios. Most people don't have devastatingly handsome doctors performing their rescue. The swimming lesson evolved into breakfast at a nearby cafe, where we talked for hours. I learned that James was 36, originally from Boston, and had moved to LA for his residency 5 years ago. He worked 4 days a week at the hospital and spent his off days lifeguarding. "It keeps me grounded," he explained. "The hospital can be intense, gunshot wounds, car accidents, the worst days of people's lives." He gestured toward the beach. "Here I can prevent those worst days sometimes." "Is that why you're still single?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "The demanding schedule?" He gave me a knowing look. "Partly. Also hadn't met anyone worth rearranging my schedule for." He paused. "Until recently, the following weeks were a whirlwind." James continued giving me swimming lessons, though we spent as much time kissing as we did practicing strokes. We went on proper dates too. Dinners, movies, long walks on the beach that should have felt cliché but somehow didn't. I learned that James sung old Beatles songs in the shower, preferred his coffee black, and could quote entire episodes of The Office from memory. He discovered my obsession with architectural documentaries, my inability to cook anything more complicated than pasta, and my secret fear of heights. Ironic for someone who designed skyscrapers. The first time we made love was after a particularly long day at the hospital for him. He showed up at my door at midnight, still in his scrubs, looking exhausted. "Lost a patient today," he said quietly when I let him in. "Teenage girl, car accident. Couldn't save her." I pulled him into my arms, feeling him shake slightly as he finally let himself break down. We stood there in my darkened hallway for what felt like hours, just holding each other. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red but clearer. "Stay," I whispered, "please." He did. That night was tender and desperate at the same time, both of us needing to feel alive, to confirm that love still existed in a world that could be so cruel. Afterward, as we lay tangled in my sheets, he traced patterns on my chest. "I love you," he said suddenly. "I know it's fast, but—" I silenced him with a kiss. "I love you too. Have since you brought me back to life on that beach." Our relationship wasn't without challenges. James's schedule was unpredictable, with emergency surgeries often interrupting our plans. Sometimes he'd come home haunted by the patients he couldn't save, and all I could do was hold him. Other times, he'd be so exhausted he'd fall asleep mid-conversation. Then there was the day we ran into my clients at a restaurant, an older conservative couple who were funding a major office building project. They saw James kiss me goodbye, and their expressions made their feelings clear. The next day, they pulled their funding. I was devastated, not by the loss of the project, but by the reminder that not everyone would accept us. James found me in my home office, staring at the building plans. "We could be more discreet," he offered. "In public, I mean." "No," I said firmly. "I won't hide you. I won't hide us. They can take their money elsewhere." He pulled me into a fierce kiss. "God, I love you." 2 months later, I got an even bigger project from a firm that specifically sought out LGBTQ+ architects. "Their loss, my gain," my new client said with a wink. Sarah naturally took full credit for our relationship. "If you hadn't nearly drowned, you'd never have met your hot Dr. Lifeguard," she'd say whenever she visited. "You're welcome." "Please stop calling him that," I'd groan, while James would just laugh and high-five her. Our families met over Thanksgiving. James's parents flew in from Boston, and along with my sister and parents, we had dinner at my place. Our mothers immediately bonded over embarrassing childhood stories, while our fathers discovered a shared passion for vintage cars. "They're planning our wedding," James whispered to me in the kitchen as we did dishes. "I heard them discussing color schemes. Getting ahead of themselves, aren't they?" He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Maybe not." As our 1-year anniversary approached, I found myself thinking more and more about that casual comment James had made about marriage. We'd moved in together 6 months ago, merging his medical textbooks with my architectural journals, his healthy cooking equipment with my takeout menus, his life with mine. Living together revealed new sides to him. I discovered he had a habit of falling asleep while reading medical journals, his reading glasses askew on his face. He learned that I sometimes got up at 3 a.m. to sketch building ideas that came to me in dreams. We both found out that we were terrible at keeping plants alive, despite our best efforts. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up alone. James had the early shift at the hospital. On his pillow was a note. "Meet me at Tower 14 at sunset. Love you. Jay." Tower 14 was where he'd saved my life. I spent the day both excited and nervous, wondering what he had planned. When I arrived at the beach that evening, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. James was waiting by the tower, but he wasn't alone. Several of our friends were there, including Sarah and some of his colleagues from the hospital. The beach had been decorated with lanterns and flowers, and there was a small table set up with champagne. "What's all this?" I asked as I approached. James took my hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Remember how you said I brought you back to life on this beach?" I nodded, my heart starting to race. "Well, you brought me back to life too," he continued. "Before you, I was just existing, working, sleeping, saving lives, but not really living my own. You changed that. You make me want to be more than just the guy who saves people. You make me want to be the guy who loves, who laughs, who builds a life with someone." He dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling out a small box. Inside were 2 platinum bands. "Nathan Parker, will you marry me?" Here, where our story began. Tears were streaming down my face as I pulled him up into a kiss. "Yes," I whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. Our friends erupted in cheers. Sarah was crying harder than anyone, filming the whole thing on her phone. "I have a surprise too," I said once we'd put on our rings. "Remember that beachfront property we looked at last month?" James nodded. "The one that needed complete renovation. I bought it, and I've designed our home." I pulled out the plans from my bag. "If you want it," he looked at the drawings. A modern beach house with large windows to catch the sunset, a wraparound deck, perfect for morning coffee, and a private pool for swimming lessons. "You did this for us? For our future," I said softly. "What do you think?" His answer was another kiss, more passionate this time, causing our friends to whoop and whistle. The wedding was 6 months later, right there on Venice Beach. James wore a light gray suit, I wore navy blue, and we both went barefoot in the sand. Our vows made everyone cry. I promised to always be his safe harbor, while he promised to keep saving me, every day, in all the ways that mattered. Sarah was my best woman, and James's brother Michael was his best man. The ceremony was small but perfect, with the sound of waves providing our background music. Even my former clients showed up, having had a change of heart after seeing our story featured in a local LGBTQ+ magazine. For our honeymoon, we went to Hawaii, where James taught me to surf, sort of. I spent more time falling off the board than riding waves. We made love on deserted beaches under starlit skies, planned our future between snorkeling sessions, and completely forgot about the rest of the world. Now, 3 years after that fateful day when I nearly drowned, we're living in our beach house. James still works at the hospital and lifeguards when he can. I've started my own architectural firm, specializing in sustainable coastal buildings. We've adopted a golden retriever named Scout, who loves the water even more than James does. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of waves and the sight of my husband preparing for his morning swim. Sometimes I join him. I'm actually a decent swimmer now. Other times I just watch from our deck, marveling at how nearly dying led me to really living. Last week, we started talking about adopting. There's a room in our house that would make a perfect nursery, and we both feel ready to expand our family. James will be an amazing father. I see it in the way he interacts with his young patients, in how gentle and patient he is with everyone he meets. Sometimes, when we're lying in bed at night, listening to the ocean, I think about how many things had to align for us to find each other. If I hadn't gone swimming that day, if James hadn't been on duty, if I hadn't gone back to thank him, but then James will pull me closer, press a kiss to my shoulder, and murmur, "I love you" in his sleep, and I realize it doesn't matter. Some people are just meant to find each other, even if it takes nearly drowning to make it happen. They say near-death experiences change you. They're right. But love, real, deep, soul-changing love, that transforms you even more. James didn't just save my life that day on the beach. He gave me a new one, filled with more joy and love than I ever thought possible. And every time I see him in his lifeguard tower, or watch him save lives at the hospital, or simply hold him in our bed, I fall in love all over again with the man who brought me back to life in more ways than one.